It's 9:30, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm here in the studio alone today because Dr. Cook is still recuperating from surgery. And if you didn't hear the other day, the doctor did tell his wife he was a big baby. So it confirms exactly what you know. Our guest today is Gordon Mohn. And I think everybody knows Gordon, but Gordon is the superintendent at McPherson, and they're a Mercury school. Good morning, Gordon, and thanks for agreeing to join us today.
Morning.
Gordon, there's a lot of interest when we've done the webinars. And oh, by the way, I want to invite everybody that's on, please jump in, ask questions. We'd much rather have a dialogue with Gordon and McPherson as kind of our focus. But Gordon, first question. Well, looking back now at Redesign from a superintendent standpoint at Christmas time, what's become clear to you about Redesign?
Necessary. It's essential that we do it. Some things that have happened here. It's the most difficult and challenging endeavor I've ever been involved in. I've been doing this since '71, so, but it's also has the potential to be the most significant. And, you know, my perspective is a little different in that the way we're structured here purposely, the bulk of the redesign work was done by our two assistant superintendents. So we have an elementary person and a high school person or secondary person. They worked with those building teams. So I think as a superintendent, what I learned, and my experience before in Hillsborough would have been a smaller school that we wouldn't have had that kind of structure, is you really have to trust your people, have to trust them, have to protect them in some ways, in a lot of ways. But it's definitely, we thought we had done a lot of innovative things, but we saw that we weren't, the performance indicators we were looking at, whatever they were at best flat. When we always like to compare ourselves to Bueller, and we weren't able to do things as well as Bueller can. On some of the indicators we looked at, we said that shouldn't be that way. We ought to be able, if they can do it down the road, we ought to be able to do those kind of things here. So that drove us. You know,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got.
Yeah.
We worked so hard on doing the things we've always done, and just hard work doesn't move the needle.
Yeah. Gordon, you talked about that you have two assistant superintendents, and we have very few ESSDACK districts that have two assistant superintendents, but as the superintendents are listening to this conversation, their buildings will have redesign teams, and the state has really put an emphasis, KSDE has put an emphasis on pilot and co-pilot, where those teachers do a lot of the work, and with the principals being present. So in a lot of ways, in the smaller districts, their principals and the pilot and co-pilot are doing some of that stuff. So the trust issue is still there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, and sometimes us having a central office presence is an impediment in that, well, we got to get it by the central office before we can do it, or what do they think up there? And we've got to keep pushing that down to the building level and saying, now we'll help you facilitate, we'll provide support, but you need to tell us what you have, what you need.
Yeah. Well, and that's really hard to do. You know, when you have an adaptive challenge, you're trying to do something that's never been done before, and you hit it right on the head. You got to try something different. How have you given them permission to try new things and, you know, have the courage to do that?
Well, partly by just staying out of the way,
Yeah.
providing providing the support for them to go look at other schools, to learn other things. We spend a little bit of money once in a while that I'm not sure we needed to go to New York City and visit a school, but one group of a team thought they did, so we sent 3 or 4 people to New York City to look at a school. Uh, I'm not going to quite I'm not going to oppose that very loud because that's what they thought they needed. So you got to
And
empower them to do that.
yeah, and you do learn something everywhere you go. You just hope there's a return on investment.
Yeah, that's the right way to say it. Yeah.
As you look back at the year you spent planning and the half year implementing from your point of view, what do you look back and say that was a good move, and what do you look back and say, man, I wished I'd done that differently?
Well, I think the social emotional things we've done, uh, the things that bring us together. We implemented capturing kids' hearts across the district. Uh, we're really working on making sure we do that with fidelity. Um, we've changed our schedules. We're doing it at one elementary and one middle school, but we've changed schedules. Our elementary has a morning meeting. Uh, we've done a nice job of building community with staff and kids. That morning meeting at Eisenhower, the mayor was there the other day to run the meeting. We've had police officers, college professors, moms, dads come in to run those. So that community piece at Eisenhower especially is strong. Um, things like that we hadn't done. Um, our whole thing was, I'll call it tainted a little bit by early in the implementation process. A parent was working with her child in the evening on something through the Summit Learning platform, and they accessed an inappropriate site. Uh, I wouldn't describe it as pornography, but it's not something you want middle school kids looking at. It's not something we would look at in the workplace. I mean, it was without a doubt inappropriate, and that just exploded things. Because the story was, well, we're letting kids watch porn on their computers at school, and uh, so it's hard to tell what the community reaction would have been without that incident. I think we could have been more effective. I might call it, we could have controlled it a little better. That once that exploded, then we sensitized, and rightfully so, we sensitized a lot of parents. So it's been an uphill battle now to, one, help parents understand on the internet safety side. We can't guarantee 100% safety on the internet. And I'm just not going to do that. We can't do it. We're going to do everything we can to keep you safe, but it's a team effort between the school and parents and kids. We've had a couple of incidents where you remember if you go to an unabridged dictionary, you can find inappropriate words. Well, I don't think we're
Yeah.
ever going to get unabridged dictionaries off the internet. We got to teach kids self-control. You don't do that. So we're working on that. I don't know. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, and I want to dig into that a little bit. In terms of bringing your community along, I know Mike and I actually happened to be in McPherson and sat in on one of your community meetings. What kind of things did you do as a district to orient parents to redesign? And also by building, what did you do to orient parents?
Well, we had a variety of parent meetings. We had evening sessions. We had some focus group discussions. But the reality, and I've not figured out how to do this, until people live in a redesigned school, they don't have enough, and I'm talking about our adults as well, or our staff as well. They can't have a legitimate discussion about what that's going to look like until they experience it. Now, we learned a little bit by going to some schools that were doing things similar to what we wanted to do. And we learned how it looked there. But until you live it, and I don't have the answer to that. You know, I suppose most important thing we do is we have to build trust with our community and our parents that we're going on this moonshot journey and we're designing the rocket as we go, and we don't know what it's going to look like. I use this example because we have industry around here. When the refinery decides they have to reset the plant or retool, they shut down and take 6 months sometimes to retool, to reset the plant. They lose production. And then they start up again and operate under this redesigned plant that's dealing with physical, fairly easy to measure and predictable things. And they even find at startup that it wasn't as they had planned. But we don't have a startup plan like that. We didn't shut down schools for 6 months and redesign. You know, even in our world today, shutting down over the summer is not like the refinery shutdown that they do. So
Yeah.
retool on the go, and it's not going to be perfect. And so I've used that example to our community, and of course, a legitimate community and parent concern about that is, well, don't experiment with my child. You know, I want the best for my child. You begin to experiment and it fails, it does harm to my child. So you got to
Yeah.
be able to balance that.
Yeah, and I know that you have really hit on the message. We're never intentionally going to do anything to harm kids. Our focus is always on getting better at what we do for kids. Does most of the community understand that?
I think so. Um, I think as parents go through this experience, or middle school parents especially, many of them are feel better about it as they learn about it. We've got a
Yeah.
vocal core still that, you know, the things we do get interpreted in ways that we never imagined they would get interpreted. You know, like it used to be at our middle school, we had mandatory Saturday school for kids who hadn't achieved a certain level of mastery. That was 5 years ago. And so you were required to come in on Saturday to do the work. And this last Saturday, we opened the doors to our middle school and said, if you want some extra help, this is voluntary. Our administrators will be here, our teachers will be here. Come in and we'll be happy to help you. Well, not everybody saw that as a positive. It was, so you just got to be ready for that kind of thing, that some well-intentioned things get interpreted in different ways. And I work really hard on trying to be supportive and sympathetic to the things I hear from our parents. I still believe that their reactions are because they're concerned about their child, and I can't just discount those concerns either. But that all sounds. I'm really pleased with what we're doing. I talked to a school psych the other day, and I said, "Well, how's it going with our kids that are on IEPs?" She says, "Gordon, I've seen kids make progress like I would have never imagined they were able to do." She's amazed at what some of those kids who have struggled in school before, once we're able to provide them instruction at appropriate level and the support they need, they blossomed. And we don't always hear those stories.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, they don't make the newspaper.
no, and we were probably better at meeting the needs of high performing kids than we were meeting the needs of kids who struggle. And we may still be, but we sure have helped some of those kids that are struggling.
Gordon, what have you done for the kids that have experienced trauma and kids that live in poverty?
Well, this is my philosophy, and we're trying to do this. Sometimes I'm a little bothered by all this concern, all this talk about kids who have lived in poverty and that they need to be treated differently, because the way we ought to treat those kids who are in poverty or have had traumatic experiences is exactly how we ought to treat every kid. So that's really what we need to talk about. How do we treat every kid with respect, provide them the support? Gordon Moan's kids can have traumatic experiences growing up too. It's not that you have to have lived in poverty or been in a single parent family or whatever those qualifiers are. So I really try to encourage our system, be aware that there are kids that have issues, nothing like we've ever even imagined. But we really need to treat every kid as if they have an ace or two.
Yeah.
My wife, I use my wife as a good example. And she can't count the number of aces she had growing up, but you see her today, you never know it.
Yeah.
All that stuff impacts her life. And so we've got kids like that.
Yeah. Gordon, let me pause a second. Anybody want maybe around these general topics, any questions? Dr. Cook, do you have any questions for Gordon or any of our listeners?
I'll just go ahead and say this, and I'm a questioner, and so I have what I would say a healthy skepticism about some of the things as we look at redesign, because in our building leadership teams and our district leadership team, we have implemented some change and some different things, but we haven't changed time. And we're still looking and researching and want to know more about that. So what are your thoughts? Did you go to a flex mod, I don't know what they call it, schedule at the secondary levels?
No,
at the elementary?
We purposely chose the middle school because I don't know how we're going to redesign a high school. We've been talking now for a year and a half about schedules and flexibility and stuff, and we're a long way from getting it. We have a fairly traditional looking schedule yet at our middle school. We have a personalized learning time that begins each day where kids are with their mentors. Then we have a typical kid will have four core subjects. So we've got an English language arts, social studies, science, and math. Then we have a set of electives. We also have another common personalized learning time in the middle of the day where kids can get together and with their mentors again. 1 day a week is primarily on the Summit platform. So they're working on focus areas. The other 4 days in class are around projects.
Mm-hmm.
We still have a pretty typical looking schedule.
Right. So maybe you just change some structures within that time frame.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see. I know Liberal's done a different schedule at their high school. I don't know how we're going to break that dang schedule, but I'd love
Right.
to. And, we're driven by elective course offerings as well. And
Mm-hmm.
Suzanne, Randy was the keynote speaker at our national conference, and we always, it's kind of fun to hear your commissioner speak out of state, because they talk about stuff that they're a little more cautious of saying in state.
Sure.
And a big part of his message was, why do we organize around age, time, and content? And, that's exactly the question that you're asking. Those are huge pieces of our system. And if you're going to make real systemic change, in some way, you got to start to address those.
Right. But here's my response to that. So then homeschool. Isn't that what homeschool is?
Interestingly, in our experience in visiting with homeschool parents, many times they organize their day just like the school does. Because that's what they know.
Right.
That's what we know, is how do you organize around time and content and age,
Right.
with the littler kids. It's an interesting dilemma that I suspect over the next couple of years, we're going to get to spend a lot more time with.
I agree. And I think that that's where we're at in the process, is that we're making change that we see a need for, and we have done more, what I would say, we've literally built schedules for kids individually so they can go work. We've done some things like that, but nothing systemic, because I think we're watching McPherson and Liberal and other schools to see what they're doing.
Randy's doing what a commissioner ought to do. He's talking about the great ideas, the big ideas.
Yeah.
Come sit in a high school principal's seat and do it. Find me somebody that's doing it. I agree completely, but we need to find examples of how we've individualized at the high school level, especially.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I heard Randy speak, age, time, content. How do we, and why do we, what's a different way to organize? I wonder if there isn't a fourth one in there. And this is kind of rolled around in my head, especially after listening, Suzanne, to what you just said. Is it location? Are we willing to look at this system and say there's an opportunity here to provide external validation of learning outside of our buildings? Because especially with like the homeschoolers and the work, we used to call that work study and on-the-job training and that kind of stuff, but we never gave the academic credit for it.
Right.
Learned. So I wonder, about that fourth one. Is there a location issue? But I found it interesting too, as Gordon, as you were sharing what you've done, you've hit on some nuggets of information I think we all ought to take out of here. Trust. How do we build that trust? Not just with our staff and our teams, but we have to build that trust internally. Do I really truly trust my teams and building assistant superintendents, principals to go and do? And how do I verify and validate that trust with them? How do we protect them? My second nugget that I picked up from Gordon was, how do we protect them as leaders? Because the domestic violence that occurs, and I use that, when we do something innovative, one teacher does it, does the staff accept it? Do the parents accept it? What's that protection that we can offer? And then the courage to take on and do something different. Randy has often told us, well, let's do it and then ask for permission. Of course, then, there's the fallouts and the excitements that happen from that. Message clarity. Gordon, you talked about, we got to get the message clear with our community because we offered this Saturday thing and it just didn't come out that way. I find those things amazing nuggets of wisdom we ought to all be listening to and saying, how do we internalize that? make sure we're doing it and provide that then for those change agents out there. So I don't know, random thought there, but is there a fourth?
Yeah. I see Josh's comment. Josh, I see you turned your camera off, but have you left us? You can't comment and then run out of your office. I'm reading Josh's comment regarding the question, why do we organize around age, content, and time? Why not do it this way? Question mark. What opportunity lost is truly taking place because of organizing around age, content, and time? What are the opportunities that are lost because we organize that way? It's a really good question.
You know what I've learned watching the Summit Learning platform, and I think there could be other platforms as well that would do that. Sometimes it's not even correct to call that a platform, but we're getting close to be able to handle the basic pieces of core instruction with that kind of medium. It's much better. We're much more able to monitor kids and assist kids. It's not perfect yet, but if we can ever really do that, that the discussions then that teachers are involved in, it could still be around it would be around that content, but it's much richer. And to me, that's exciting. You know, we have kids that choose to, a few that have left to enroll in Lawrence Virtual School because they didn't like being on their computer all the time. You know, I think that's it's close to being here that we're going to be able to do those things, and that, to me, that's encouraging, because it'll give us time then to organize differently. Once we get over, I've got to be able to face-to-face deliver the basic pieces of instruction to kids. It takes a human face to do it.
Gordon, as your middle school has worked through Summit Learning, has the ability to give each kid the amount of time they need, has that become obvious that that's it's an advantage?
Well, we definitely see at what different rates kids are working. It's, you know, we can really keep track of that. And if you can imagine that, if we were working as efficiently as we could and kids had really progressed at a rate that is what they're able to do, and then all this other stuff wasn't getting in the way, we see a wide range of abilities here. And it just points out that instruction to the middle, even small instruction going to the middle, isn't what we want. I mean, that's not as effective. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, I think you did. And you know, the other piece that we're always concerned about, what's the engagement like with the kids, the authentic engagement, where kids are truly interested in what they're learning. Has it changed with Summit Learning?
Well, I see that through the project side. You know, I see kids engaged at levels that they haven't been engaged before. And that, I hear that a lot, that I've got kids now that are interested in whatever the learning activity is, who would have stood in the back before and not spoken up and not be involved. So I see that engagement piece is significantly better.
Yeah, and you know, and we've talked about this for years. We're pretty convinced that kids are authentically engaged. They're pretty much getting what they need. Mm-hmm. Those are the kids we don't need to worry about. The ones that are authentically engaged. Yeah. Gordon, I want to share a screen with you from KSDE and ask you a little bit about this. the principles, redesign principles. And we understand nobody's working on all of these yet. How are you, which are some of these that you're kind of focused on or you've seen progress on?
Well, first of all, those changed since we did it. So this is the version. We had 10 design principles at that time, but they're still similar. I think places we need to work more would be in community partnerships
Uh-huh.
and in these real world applications. Yeah, especially the community partnership piece.
Gordon, is some of that because your high school's not involved, it's your middle school. And, you know, when you talk internships and getting out in the community more, isn't that really more, isn't it easier with high school kids than it is with middle school kids? Or am I incorrect on that assumption?
I don't know, the high school piece, you know, we have intern opportunities here. But they're not nearly as structured as we'd like them to be. They're not, you know, if we're really going to do internships well, we need to do what they do in CTE when they do internships. And, you know, we have a business teacher that has a class period a day assigned to supervise. I think he has 6 internships. So he's out observing sites. He's out helping to coach employers. He's established evaluation processes for that. And 1 hour with 6 kids to do it, you can do it. You have 700, and let's say you just want 1 class. So we've got 150 to 170 kids in a class. We've got to run 170 internships and make sure they're of quality, and make sure we provide the employer support to do it. That's a monumental thing.
Yeah.
We're kind of sloppy at it. You know, a lot depends on how well the person that agrees to have an intern, what they put into it. For instance, we've got several young people who are interested in dental hygiene. They've gone to several different dentists, and one dentist takes it on, and she has a structure and evaluation form that she did, and it's great. The other one, they tag along and watch, and that's all they do. Well,
Yeah.
that's not good for the relationship. So we got to do a lot of work there.
Yeah. You really, with the Summit Learning though, the students have choice over time, place, pace, and path, that individualized, personalized learning. That may not be the best solution in the world, but it is on target, isn't it, for that one?
Yeah, you know, we say once in a while, well, in a few years, maybe we can do this without being dependent on some kind of platform. I don't know how we manage that. The technical side of it is so important. The training piece, adapting, adding your own information. If you don't have somebody that's able to put that together for you, I don't know how you would do it. We can.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we've noticed too is, and we've all known this, and it's not a negative about teachers at all, but teachers' abilities are on a spectrum, and we're not all A+, and we have some good people that are C+, or however you want to grade those people, and we have to be able to help them all along. But when you go to an implementation like this, some are just a lot better at it than others. And how do we help those people who are good people but struggle with it to be successful?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, people ask us, I get this question all the time. Well, what do our teachers at the middle school really think about this? I'm not sure. I think every one of them this year would have at one point in time said, oh, I wish we hadn't done this. It was so much easier last year.
Yeah.
That's not an indictment that I'm not happy with what we did. It's just an understanding that this is hard. I came to a place, I always said this, if I can't eat and sleep, I need to change my job. But my job keeps me from eating and sleeping. Well, obviously it hasn't kept me from eating, but it was also now keeping me from sleeping. And I finally had to say, put this in perspective, Gordon. Get a handle on this. Realize that it takes time, but it's hard. It's been hard.
Gordon, we have a question from John Black. Said, Gordon, has there been any interaction with the association over the last 18 months?
No, we've been, that hasn't developed. It would have been to our benefit if they would have made a strong statement, but partly because it's only at Eisenhower in the middle school, and right now our primary leadership from the association is in other buildings. They've not stepped out. I think what happened a little bit. We had a public board. We had a board meeting early when this blew up that had 100 people there, and I didn't do a very good job of controlling it, if that's what we need to do. And there were things said to our teachers. We had a group of teachers that had presented that really was hurtful to them, and they've backed down a little bit. They love to be in the classroom, but they don't want to fight these. Heck, if they wanted to fight the public battle, they'd be a principal or a superintendent. They want to be in the classroom taking care of kids.
Yeah.
So they've kind of backed off a little, and I understand that.
Sure. Gordon, what's the role of your pilot and co-pilot in each of the schools? The teacher-led part, how's that worked for you?
It worked very, very well as we developed our ideas, as they put meat on this, as they made public presentations last spring, as they presented to our board last spring and got our board support. Where we could have done better is once the pushback came and once concerns began to be expressed, we backed off from requiring or allowing them to own all of this, and our building leaders, our central office leaders, administrators basically took that on. And so I think if I were to do it differently, we've gone back to those teams as concerns get expressed and allow them to respond and allow them to interact with the people who express concerns, rather than stepping in as an administrator and say, we're going to take this on. We're going to become the voice of the district. We needed to figure out a way, one, to protect them, but another way to let them continue to be the voice of redesign. And so in retrospect, at least, that's one area we didn't do very well. I would do differently.
Gordon, our observation from a distance watching the redesign schools is the role of the principals kind of precarious also. They need to be there, they need to assist, but if they're too assertive, everybody looks at them for all the answers. But if they're not there, the teachers don't feel like they're empowered to do anything. Is that a fair observation?
Oh, I think absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think the hardest job in this whole redesign is principal leadership, principal involvement, range from those principals who traditionally own and control everything and having to give up some control,
Mm-hmm.
to trusting the system to take care of itself. You know, I'm still too much of a, I have to have way too many answers before we take the leap. And that probably is a hindrance. But if you don't have some of those answers when you leap, it crashes. So yeah, it's hard. And I'm really pleased with the work our principals have done. They've brought these teams along. They're just a key. And I think especially if you don't have assistant superintendent support like we had, then it becomes, the whole burden becomes that principal's, I think.
Yeah, it's on the principal's shoulders then. Hey, shift gears a little bit. You talked about the redesign principles that the Mercury School started under. One of those was an intense focus on student success.
Mm-hmm.
How have you kept that intense focus on student success? And how, we know that we've got the National Student Clearinghouse data down the road, but you've got elementary and middle school people, so that measure is at least 6 years out. What have you used as intermediate measures, and how have you kept that focus on student success?
I'm supposed to have a good stock answer for that, right?
Well,
here's our dilemma, okay? And this may be unique to McPherson. If you remember back in the innovative school stuff, when Randy worked with the state board and the legislature, and we became one of the innovative schools, we were relieved partially from the requirement to take the state assessments. Everything was ACT driven and the subtest for ACT. And throughout the district, we de-emphasized the state assessments. Things like, we decided, and I think it's a good idea, once a month, every elementary classroom has a field trip once a month. And they take at least half a day to a day and go out and visit some appropriate place. They've got a whole list of things they do. Great experience. It cuts down on the amount of time available for instruction. By de-emphasizing that, our state assessment scores have not looked very good. And our excuse is, well, we de-emphasized it. Kids don't try very hard. One of our elementaries did all the tests almost on one day instead of spreading it out. So, that old thing of do your best that didn't get communicated. So we don't have a very good measure of what we believe our kids were doing when we look back at the state assessments. We didn't have any interim. We didn't use the state interim tests. We don't have MAP testing. So now we're into this and we're saying, okay, we're doing the state interims now. What measures do we have to show that we're making progress? And we don't really have any. And so I think the other thing in hindsight, those schools that have a good feeling that they have assessments that accurately show where kids are performing, that's a big plus if you've got it. And
yeah.
So we're trying to work through that too.
Gordon, what's become clear to us is that those assessments are vitally important in terms of how's our academic preparation. They're not very good as an overall system measure of the system. They're really good in terms of academic preparation. The problem that we see in the No Child Left Behind era, we judge the value of the entire system based on some test scores. Is that a fair assessment? Is that kind of what you're wrestling with?
Well, I think the other piece of that is our public, we're willing to do a lot of different and innovative things with school as long as we don't sacrifice academic success. I mean, we have to make sure that's in place, and then we can do a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah.
We have good, strong academic preparation in place, that becomes a problem. And so while it's by far not the only measure, it by far isn't, for me, even the most important piece that kids have to emerge with when they leave school. It's probably the most essential piece. If you think about it, why do we have school? Well, it's around academic preparation and the other things in tie to that. So that's kind of how I look at that. And you think of it, you know, we sold people so much on, you get another point or two on your ACT, and that means more scholarships and more opportunity, more post-secondary opportunities. So our parents are driven by, if I can get a 29 on my ACT, I can go here, here, and here and get these kind of dollars because of it. So that plays a big part in how parents especially see this.
Gordon, what role has your National Student Clearinghouse data played in your redesign?
Well, we've been looking at it for 10 years almost now.
Yeah.
For us, it drives the. I say this to our public. Maybe it's not true, but we believe we're one of the best schools in Kansas. Our community believes we're pretty darn good. But yet you look at the numbers and sometimes those numbers don't show that. So let's take a good deep look at what we're doing. You know, my example, if Bueller can have I think Bueller's dropout rate was like, or graduation rate was like 96, 97%, something like that. And we're at 89. And I just asked that question. If Bueller can be there, why can't we? What's going on in Bueller that's not going on here? We've asked that question.
Let me pause. Dr. Cook, you look like something's on your mind. Josh, Suzanne, questions?
You know, I think it's interesting, and I'm going to go back a bit. When Gordon talked a bit about principal leadership is one of the key components, and it's the hardest yet to get it in this redesign, because, you know, when we look at that principalship and we look at the principal's role as it currently is, that principal is basically supervising a building of not just the teachers, but also the students and the non-certified staff that's in there. We've all been principals at some point in time in our career. That is a mammoth task. I begin to wonder if maybe the redesign of the entire supervision system of our system shouldn't be looked at. I think about Spirit Aerospace and Boeing. I had a good friend who's a supervisor out there on the floor. So one day I asked him, I said, how many people do you supervise? And he said, only about 12 to 15. And he said, once we get more people online doing work, you know, whatever that work is, we have to add a supervisor. And he said, that's why I became a supervisor, because we added staff. And I look at that and I think, okay, Gordon's high school probably has, I don't know, gosh, Gordon, how many teachers do you have? 60?
60, yeah.
And you have a principal and maybe 2 assistant principals, I don't know.
Mhm.
And so you begin to start looking at that and you say, wow, you got 700 kids and you've got 60 staff members and 4 custodians and 3 cooks. And, you know, everybody knows I just wonder.
45 or 100 paraprofessionals, maybe. I don't know how many of those people we have.
And I just begin to wonder if there, you know, in that whole redesign structure of the system, is there something to be said for maybe we ought to look at how we do from the administrative system. I don't know. That was a thought that came to mind when you mentioned the principal leadership things. I also really do appreciate how do we as leaders let go and let people begin to carry their own water, because that's a huge trust thing you've got to have, because if they carry their own water, you know, ultimately that's going to end up on our desk. Whether we goof it up or not, we have to have that extreme ownership of the issues, but at the same time, we have to let them execute, I guess. I don't know. My brain is right. Steve, you asked me, there's some things that, no, my brain is just kind of churning right now on this conversation this morning. And Suzanne, you guys have done some really interesting stuff with internships, I know. So I'm sure you've got some experience in that.
Right. Well, a couple of thoughts that I've had. I think you're onto something about the principals, because what I observe with our building leaders, our teacher leaders, is that sometimes that creates internal issues, because they're teacher leaders and then there's the principal. And I could see where looking at that leadership, those levels of leadership and how that works within the building could be, I don't know, tweaked or, you know, just reevaluated, because it puts teachers in a situation where they're a leader without the title of being principal, and yet they're trying to maintain relationships as a peer with their teachers, and that's gone on forever, not just during redesign, but it could be interesting if a school took a look at that. The second thing is, as I'm sitting here thinking, maybe we're starting with the and going backwards, because we just met last week and we're looking at 3 different diplomas. And maybe what's going to happen is our diplomas are going to put us in a position where we're going to design then for the end in mind. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so, because I keep talking about schools within a school, and so that's really, which, like, when I get into these discussions, I'm wondering, why am I retiring? But because
I'm wondering that also, Suzanne.
because this is the part of my job that I love. But the thing is, essentially what we're saying is that within the confines of our school, we've got groups of kids and individuals that match those various diplomas, and now we're going to design their high school experience based on that. Help them in their individual plans, create what that looks like. The criteria for our diplomas is pretty interesting. We're still on the groundwork, and now I've got to let the board know that we're having these discussions, so get ready, because, you know, we know the different audiences that we're going to have to pull together to take a look at these diplomas. But I thank you, Gordon, for being so honest today and giving some good things here for me to think about and to share with our building leader. I'm not mentioning names by any stretch, but just to share the process, and as we go through this, what they need to be aware of.
I had a conversation with the superintendent of the school district here in central Kansas, who hasn't jumped into the state redesign stuff. But when you have the conversation, they're doing a lot of the good things. And if I backed up and looked, I'm not sure if I wouldn't fly under the radar and do all that good stuff, and I don't have to have this Kansas label on me. I mean, there's people doing great things, and I think maybe we've swallowed a little too much of the Kool-Aid to think we all got to be a redesigned school, and those that aren't doing redesign aren't doing anything.
Well, I will tell you that there are several of us as leaders in our district that are we're a little bit of a renegade or rogue, and that was we're working under the radar. We just didn't want to have to follow rules and things and organization. We wanted to we kind of wanted to do our own thing and see what we could do, and then we're thinking, maybe in a couple of years we'll jump on redesign, or they'll tell us we have to. But we're doing it all through KISA. I mean, all of this is happening as a result of that.
A rule that I wish we wouldn't have to follow is that we had to have a plan in place and implement it after 1 year of consideration.
I know. We could not live with that.
If I was going to do it again, I'd say it needs to be more gradual. It can't be so abrupt. We need to pilot some things, and we didn't feel like we had that. We're all good. I think maybe now you do. But the summit piece, we should have piloted it. And
yeah,
some kids and teachers that were excited and willing to do it, experiencing success, and that would have brought other people along.
And Gordon, I want to add to that, because we observe there's no clear line where you say we're planning, now we're implementing. The redesign schools, they started doing stuff, the first month they started experimenting with stuff. Some things started a month in, and other things won't start for 2 years in. There's not this fine line that tomorrow we're going to implement.
But that was the message we got in this first round.
Yeah.
You got to launch in August, and it's got to be developed. And we had some early discussions some discussions really toward the end. Should we pilot this? Should we back off a little? And our feeling was that while we probably could have got away with it, that wasn't the intent from KSDE.
Yeah.
I think there is some, and this is just something in my head. As that push to get things launched was out there, I think there was an intent there that we don't just continue to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk.
Right.
We're forced into doing something. So, the whole idea of we are a redesign, we're going to fly under the radar. All good. I think the key thing is that we roll back to the success of each student. What's the data telling us about each student becoming successful? Because if Gordon, as a Mercury school, just blows the lid off of that, and that number jumps, and we got to keep in mind that there's a face behind each one of them numbers, because I talk the numbers and it starts to sound like there's no human there, but there is. We can game the numbers all we want, but the reality is there's a face behind that. So if Gordon's numbers go way up and Suzanne's go way up, well, that's what it's all about. That's that. So, but the reality, I think, is we could talk it to death and never do anything.
There's a balance there, absolutely.
And I think that I think that's where we may have, we need to tweak it, but we'll get better as we go. So.
Josh, I'm looking at your picture and you're leaning in and thinking. Tell us what's on your mind.
I feel like I've been watching. I need to speak up a little bit. I'm enjoying the conversation. I know in our district, the same kind of conversations about what's worth it, what's not. The board perspective is there too, because teachers might have a conversation, but if board members aren't there to support it, then you've got another piece there to work, to be thinking about for sure. Or parents. All these pieces go together. There's not just one group that's working on this whole thing. It's everybody. I posted that question about why change. It's kind of that why I missed. I had a person come in the office and I missed the topic about that, but I had asked that question about the age, content, time, and why not change? To me, that's part of this discussion is, are we changing just to change, or is there a purpose behind it? Which is, I guess I look at it, I think I go back a couple years ago as an admin group, we shadowed kids. We randomly picked some kids just to go shadow. And the aha to me, when we collected all our notes at the end of it, one of our key questions we asked was, is the student you shadowed reaching their full potential every day? And it was amazing to even a high performer to low performer, the kids aren't. The high performers spend for 30% of their time getting the information, and they set the next 40 minutes of class and just kind of twirl the thumbs. Really, they don't have a lot to do. And so to me, why change is because we're not making the best use of our time, I guess, for each kid.
Yeah.
Now, change it, I have no idea, because it does become quite the conversation. I think it changes how we lead. We have a model of a superintendent, principal, classroom teacher. Kind of goes back to what Dr. Cook said about teams of 3 or 4. Is there another way to even structure how we put school together? And then when you start talking that way, what does that mean for me as a superintendent, my job, my dollar amount that I make every year? I'll be real about that. It becomes really, no one's going to want to change how much they make every year, voluntarily take a pay cut. I don't know of anybody that's going to want to just do that kind of stuff, to shift that money to a teacher that's a leader. And then to make it work, you've got to add time in a system, which is money. Time and money go together. So how do you add time without more money? I think that's kind of what we're coming down to. How do you add more time to this without more money? What was the other conversations come up this week? Even virtual learning. This conversation wouldn't have been here 20 years ago because virtual learning wasn't even a concept. And so now a kid can go home and enroll online in something and perceive they are learning, but then we're finding out content's not everything. Having a conversation with the person how to work through troubles and challenges is significant in this whole thing. And just getting the content's only a small piece of what they actually need to be successful in life. And so sure, a kid can go online, but that's not going to trigger success by any means. So there's all these other pieces to it. How do we show that it's valuable to be in the building every day? And I think that's where I'm at. We know it's important, but how do you show it? And that's what people want to see. They want to see evidence. And so how do you show that evidence? So conversations are about all we have right now, and salesmanship. So trying to find some other ways to collect that would be great. So anyway, that's my 2-minute, 3-minute take on this whole thing.
Josh, I want to add just a little bit to that. And those experiments that you run, I think are crucial. Gordon, I'm with you. Run some experiments, see what works, what doesn't. The other thing, I think we try to sell people that every solution's a silver bullet. Every solution has ups, but most of them also have a downside. And we need to be aware of those also. On the other hand, we visit with teachers a lot, and if somebody is trying something and there's one kid that fails, we want to say, well, then that's not a good idea. Well, what we're doing now is not working for every kid. So it's a net sum game. How do we keep helping more and more kids? And maybe it's not the same solution for every kid.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
One of the things that I remind people of often, and I think it's reality, I know it's a reality. Our kids who have done school well understand the traditional system, and they performed well in it. They understood what was expected. They were able to please their teachers. They were able to get good grades. when you change the system, I've noticed schools become challenging for kids for which it was never very challenging before.
Yeah.
So you change the system. Now I hear this often. My kid got A's and B's last year in school, and and now they're getting C's. What happened? Well, the only thing that changed was the system changed. And so we've challenged kids to learn in different ways who were learning well and would have been, successful in school. So that's hard for kids. That's really hard for kids and hard for parents. And so we've challenged kids who were our success stories. And I think they'll be better once they get through it, but it's hard for them. It really is hard.
Gordon, last month, Fred Van Rankin was on and talked about a lot of the pushback they got was from kids who used to be successful and initially weren't. Now and I've talked to Fred several times, that a lot of those kids are figuring out the game has changed. So, we're going to adapt to it. I thought his comments last month were really interesting around the eligibility for athletics. They had to suspend their old rules. You can't put a kid in the middle of that and say, aha, gotcha, you can't play sports anymore. John Black, you have not turned your camera on, but you asked a question, are we recording this? The answer is yes. Mike always sends out the link when we're done. I thought your question about could we show it to the board, I think that's maybe a prudent thing to do, because a lot of times we get all of the upside of it, but Gordon, we don't often hear buts. There is a downside to it. So, John, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, John. I see you turned your mic off.
Yeah, for us, the Board of Education set researching and applying for redesign as one of their board goals for this year. And that's been a real challenge due to the fact that it's definitely top down. It's not coming up from the teachers or even from the principals. And this very honest conversation is one that I would like, at least for a small committee of board members, to listen to as they interact with building administrators and even with the association here in the next month.
Thanks, John.
One of the things we've learned too is that everything we say is listened to and scrutinized in a way that it hasn't been before. And that's okay. It ought to be that way. But we've got to have enough trust with people that we can have frank conversations and admit our warts or our did this go like we wanted it to go? No. Are we moving in the right direction? Absolutely. Would we have done things differently? Absolutely. We can't sit here and say, we did everything right. No, we learned a lot, but that's what learning's about. So I've become really aware that we've got an audience that's in Kansas, very interested in this and wants to hear.
Gordon, and for me, the big question is it the right thing to do for your kids?
What I see says we're moving in the right direction, but in total disclosure, doggone, our measure is for our middle school kids. If our only measure is our graduation success and effective rate, we can't wait that long.
Right.
So we've got to find things. We have to have confidence from year to year that this is moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
We have 15% of our freshman class drops out of school, 85% graduation rate. Have classes of 200. That means in a city like McPherson, we're putting 30 kids out in our community every year that don't have a high school diploma. That's unacceptable. And I think our community ought to be able to agree on that. We've got to help those at least get a high school diploma. So there's some pretty simple things that we need to, I think, really send that message.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, that's probably a good way to end this today. We've been going an hour and 10 minutes that flew by, quite honestly. Any other comments or questions from anybody? Gordon, I don't see anybody turning their microphone off, so I want to thank you for doing this. The feedback we're getting from superintendents is this is really valuable. And so we really appreciate you joining us. I will tell you, next month we have arrangements with a group from Wellington, another Mercury school, superintendent, curriculum director, and we think we're going to be able to have the pilot and co-pilot on with us in January. So again, Mike will mail out the link so that anybody can watch this if you want to share it. Yeah, Josh, you're welcome. Josh sent a group chat out thanking everybody, and we really appreciate the time that you all spend with us. Suzanne, we're still annoyed with you, and there's still time for you to change your mind. So with that, we're going to sign off and thank you all for joining us today. Dr. Cook, did you have any last thoughts or comments?
I'll just everybody have a great Merry Christmas and get some rest.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Same to you.
Thank you all for whatever all you do.